As many of you know, we have created an ARARA YouTube channel, and we do post most of our lecture series there. So if you could not attend a talk live or you'd like to see one again, you will be able to do that on our YouTube channel. And if you search YouTube for ARARA Rock Art, you'll be able to find us. So we invite you all to subscribe to our channel. I think we've got over 700 subscribers now and well over 10,000 views. So please avail yourself of that YouTube channel. And we are planning to continue our rock art talks most months for the foreseeable future. So stay tuned for future announcements. We are still filling up some slots in our 2024 schedule. So if you know of a speaker that you would like to hear or would like to speak yourself, please do contact us, either myself, Peter Annick, or David Kaiser. Or you could just send a message off to ARARA through our ARARA website. So again, it's a good time to turn off your personal video if you haven't already done so. And I will now pass the microphone on to Linda Olson, who is ARARA's president, and she'll say a few words about our recent conference and then introduce today's speaker.
Hello, Peter. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. And the ARARA board wishes you all well. I am Linda Olson, the president of the American Rock Art Research Association. I'm a rock art documentation specialist, and I join you from Minot, North Dakota. The American Rock Art Research Association is a diverse community of members with wide-ranging interests who are dedicated to rock art preservation, research, and education in order to communicate to a broad audience the significance of rock art as a non-renewable resource of enduring cultural value and an important expression of our shared cultural heritage. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all those whose good work made the ARARA 50 conference in Farmington, New Mexico, a welcoming and successful event. The weather cooperated and we visited some great rock art sites. There's nothing better than seeing the smile on people's face when they're enjoying what they're doing. And it definitely was that. It was very rewarding to greet old friends and make new ones. We're looking forward to the 51st conference in Visalia, California, next Memorial Day weekend. And again, renewing our rock art connections. We hope that you will be able to join us there. Tonight, I am honored to present a scholar of rock art, Jeremy Freeman. Jeremy will present a methodology developed to monitor and compare the transformational processes affecting rock art sites, providing a better understanding of how increased visitation may adversely affect sites on public land. Jeremy received his BA in anthropology from Heidelberg University and has an MA in anthropology from Ball State. He has worked as a professional archaeologist for over 25 years in cultural resource management firms, museums, universities, federal agencies, and nonprofit research institutions throughout the United States. He has also worked as a tribal archaeologist for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. He took classes at the collegiate level at Ball State University, Heidelberg University, and Owens Community College, as well as classes for youth programs. Jeremy is currently holding 2 full-time jobs as an archaeologist for the Commonwealth Utilities Corporation in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands and a historic preservation specialist for Parsons Corporation. He also conducts freelance Section 106 reviews for agencies in the CNMI. He has a passion for archaeological public outreach and education and has been involved in the development and implementation of a variety of public outreach programs, including the Fallen Timbers Public Archaeology Project, the Archaeological Discovery Tour at Minnetrista Cultural Center, the Next Step Education Through Archaeology Project, the Experiential Learning Through Historical Archaeology Project, Shumla Archaeological Research and Education Center, and Archaeological Learning Group, where he's the founder and the archaeological program coordinator. He is currently serving as a member of the Society for American Archaeology's Public Education Committee, which is a biannual elected position. He is currently working, His research interests include rock art documentation and conservation management, indigenous cosmologies, public archaeology, and mythology and the sacred landscape. Thank you, folks. Take care, stay safe, and enjoy the show.
Okay, I guess that's my cue. Go ahead and start. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I actually often watch the presentations myself. I just kind of sit in the background, and I noticed that there was kind of a lull in the speakers because I kind of look forward to the monthly speakers, and I thought I would resurrect one of my papers that I've presented in the past. I have presented this one at the Society for American Archaeology conference, and I've also presented it for a number of other venues, including an online venue called the North American Heritage at Risk. I believe that actually that recording is available on YouTube as well. And if you have, so I apologize for cross-pollination if anybody has seen the paper before, but this is my first time presenting here at ARARA, so in any capacity at ARARA. So I do appreciate the opportunity to do that as well. So I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, I should also mention too, I am possibly about to change my archaeologists are hired guns, so I actually was offered an opportunity of a lifetime to work potentially in Australia. So I think I'm actually going to be shifting my career here soon there as well. So maybe I'll have some other fodder for future papers as well. But to start, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about this particular project and where it came from. When I was working back in 2016, I had worked at Joshua Tree National Park, and this was the conference, the SAA conference in Vancouver was coming up, and frankly, I just kind of thought I was like, that'd be great. And you'll see some pictures of her here in some of the slides as well, who had never actually presented at an SAA. I was like, well, why don't we put together a paper, and we can use it as an excuse to go to Vancouver, and but we can, it'd be an opportunity for you to present at an SAA conference. And so I talked about this idea about let's do some rock art conservation management research, and then we can use that to we'll prepare a paper, and we'll present that at the conference for the they had one of two rock art sessions at the SAA conference. So some of you may have seen the paper there. This is an expanded version of the research and paper that we had presented there. And that was actually the first, and actually the only time I've actually done a paper presentation at a conference. So I was up for the challenge. Obviously, you only had 15 minutes. So we had to really get our timing down on that particular paper, but I thought it went over pretty well. So I'll talk a little bit more about the reason for this particular paper, and I just kind of I like to throw in a little bit of humor here. I know probably a lot of you have seen this online, this little meme. The reason I have it in here is it is kind of actually relevant to the paper, as you'll see a little bit later on when I talk a little bit about some of the reasoning and some of the methodology that we use. And some of the concerns that arose as part of the conservation management concerns that we had for rock art at Joshua Tree. But first, I would like to start by talking a little bit about conservation management. And I can't remember what year it was, but I did a workshop with the Society for California Archaeology, and it was a full session on looking at conservation management and developing conservation management plans. I'm not going to go into all that here because it is a pretty lengthy topic, but I just want to talk about the context for preparing a conservation management plan and why it's important really to conceptualize the kind of data that you would need for developing a conservation management plan, which I am a big believer that when you are developing a conservation management plan, you should have sufficient data to prepare it, to inform the plan that you are in fact trying to prepare. Otherwise, and I've seen this many times where plans are prepared more on kind of ideas, but they're not necessarily informed, and they might not necessarily be bad ideas, but each site is going to have its own conservation management concerns, and so each site you should have collect data that you can use to inform what the concerns are, so you can prepare a management plan that's appropriate for each site. So here I just drew this quote from the Burra Charter. This was prepared for managing Australian rock art, and I inserted the part in brackets, but it's referring to conservation management. But it states that conservation is all the processes of looking after a place so as to retain its cultural significance, which is somewhat of a broad topic, but a broad idea and concept. But I think it kind of falls in line with essentially what we look at as far as significance doing Section 106 or any sort of other evaluation of the significance of sites overall. So what a conservation management plan is, and this is kind of possibly a simplified idea of what essentially a conservation management plan is and what its purpose should be. But it's a conservation management plan comprises a prescribed set of behaviors aimed at slowing the rate of deterioration resulting from natural and anthropogenic processes. So the question is why should we have conservation management, and why should we develop these plans to address it and to I guess to really kind of conceptualize what it is that we need to do essentially to help conserve these sites. And I'll draw this distinction between conservation and preservation a little bit later, and what that ultimately may mean, because they may not necessarily all be the kind of the same idea. We tend to lump them all together, but there are many different ways of conservation management. And again, it really is dependent on the particular needs of a site. That should all be based on data that's collected. So I drew this quote from Yanni Lobser, and I can't remember from what reference it came from, and I think Yanni has spoken here at the ARARA in the past as well. But a site can ultimately be managed in a systematic, planned way, or it will be managed by the visitors who may not necessarily be cognizant of the conservation needs of that site. And I have this example here. This is actually a photograph that I took at Joshua Tree. This is a site, if you've been to Joshua Tree, you know there are many rock art sites. I believe there are at least right around 200 recorded sites. This is the only rock art site that is actually publicly interpreted. It's called the Disney Glyphs. The reason being is if you haven't been to Joshua Tree or know of this particular site, it was because there were, I guess, rock art motifs that were either added or enhanced for some film that was filmed back in like the 30s or 40s or something like that. I can't remember the particular details. Which you can see that the ones that are particularly I am sorry, I'm looking for my my annotation here real quick. They changed zoom around, so it makes it a little anyway. So they oh, hold on a sec. Okay, I'll just make that go away. Anyway, so they enhanced some of the pictographs there. They repainted them over, retouched them, or even added their own for a film. And it's actually not even certain what film it was made for. And some speculate that it was for a Disney film, but that's not even actually necessarily substantiated. And so Disney has been blamed for the desecration of this rock art site for years, even calling it the Disney Glyph site, even though we don't necessarily know if they were in fact the ones responsible. But you can see some of the of those motifs up on the upper part of the register, and also possibly some of the petroglyphs there as well. I actually did a more detailed analysis of what was authentic and what was original in that site. And there are actually, it's actually both a petroglyph site and a pictograph site, which is, as you know, is relatively unusual. And some of that was looking at some of the original paint that's left. There are smudges mostly that are original paint that weren't attributed to Disney. And looking at the petroglyphs and the grooving and things of that sort, under a microscope, essentially, kind of looking at which ones were essentially regrooved and which ones were were original based on a variety of different factors. Looking at the different things such as the class morphology and things like that. So. And I'm not going to necessarily talk so much about that. I do actually have a presentation on looking just at the Disney Glyph site and the analysis that I performed out there. But I just want to use this as an example. This is pretty common site. So while I was doing that analysis, or maybe around that time that I was thinking about doing it, I just took a random picture of people. It's a site that you can climb up into easily. It's a popular site for taking selfies and photos, and these are just a couple that were doing that. And I just used it to illustrate essentially what the conservation needs of this particular site is. There's no restricted access, essentially. People will climb up into the site, into the rock shoulder there, take photos and look at, and touch and potentially, affect the preservation of this particular site. So it's definitely one. In many ways, it's what many people would probably refer to perhaps as a sacrificial site. Although as I will talk probably a little bit later on, I don't necessarily know that we should be using that term and or even thinking that way, because I think if you have a proper conservation management plan, we don't necessarily have to look at sites as being sacrificial. But if we have an appropriate management plan, we can publicly interpret them, but also address some of the conservation needs that they may have as well. So what spurred this, or partially this particular research, is the fact that Joshua Tree, probably among many other national parks, is becoming increasingly popular. Now, the thing about Joshua Tree is it is within driving distance of two major metropolitan areas. Both LA and Las Vegas are both within a 2-hour drive to get to Joshua Tree. Of course, it really depends on LA traffic. As I'm sure some of you know, it can slow your progress down quite a bit. But you can see that the visitation levels have increased from 1979 up until 2015, when this graph was produced. You can see that it's basically exploding, and it's becoming more and more popular, which is both good and bad. It's great for the park, perhaps. It's great people are getting outside and enjoying the park system and things like that. We have an excellent park national park service. However, as an archaeologist, when your role is to protect the cultural resources, I was often asked when I was working at Joshua Tree, well, what is it that you do? What is your role at Joshua Tree? And I was like, mostly my job is to protect the park from the visitors. And anybody who's worked in the Park Service understands that is largely the role that we play. And many use the analogy that Joshua Tree is it's a loved park, and it's just loved to death. It receives too much visitation. And I have actually never seen this before, but while I was working there, they were actually referring people to other parks. It's like, yeah, they would call Joshua Tree and ask for information. Like, well, yeah, it's a great park, but you might also want to check out Mojave, Preserve as well. Try to direct them away from Joshua Tree, because we weren't lacking in any visitation whatsoever. And obviously it presents a lot of issues with traffic and other things like that. Just beyond the conservation needs, when law enforcement and other things, camping, and just protecting the what's a relatively delicate, fragile environment. It's a desert environment. You change it even slightly, you have this kind of butterfly effect that is going to have long-term effects on the conservation of the park in general. Something else that is something that is a concern in changing how we need to conceptualize conservation management is social media and the web, Google searches and things of that sort. You know, the Park Service has traditionally had this mindset and this approach to that confidentiality was the best source of protecting and preserving these sites. Well, I really think that the Park Service needs to rethink that. We live in a different age. You know, traditionally, yes, that was likely the case, that, you know, there wasn't really a good way for people to learn about, you know, site locations and stuff like this. And that was still the mentality when I was working in the Park Service, that, you know, what you kind of, when you work in cultural resources, you kind of sign this kind of code of ethics that you won't share the location of any of these sites, even though you have full access to the GIS and so forth, and hoping, I guess, that's going to help us to conserve these sites. That the problem is that, you know, people explore and they find these sites and they want to share all that they found on social media, and of course everybody has access to that. So we live in a different age. We need to start thinking differently about how our approaches to these sites, and that's one thing that I was advocating for while I was at Joshua Tree, is that, you know, we you know, this isn't necessarily a policy that's necessarily going to work. It may work for some of the remote backcountry sites, but for the more accessible ones, and I heard this question a lot, it's like, well, how did they know where it was? It's like, you do a Google search and you find directions to these sites, you sometimes GPS points and all this stuff. So it's out there, you know, if you know, people have a ways of finding it, and people who are really interested in finding these sites. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on in this talk as well. So looking again at the purpose of a management plan, and it should have, you know, really kind of four primary components that you should think about when you're preparing a management plan, but also think about what kind of data that needs to be collected in order to prepare one. So first, you should have some sort of significant statement that outlines or describes the significance of that site. When we're talking about rock art sites, it's typically not that difficult to make a case for significance, unlike maybe perhaps some other subsurface sites. Also, we need to determine why conservation is necessary at this particular site. You need to identify the conditions that are affecting the site, and that's looking again at those transformational processes, which we'll get dive into a little bit more in detail later on in this talk. And then proposed ways to conserve the site, and you know that when you are thinking about ways to conserve and intervention methods that you may want to recommend or even implement, those should be done, you know, in concert with your stakeholders, with all the everybody who has a particular interest in these sites, including, of course, the indigenous communities, who, you know, most certainly should have some sort of a voice when we are looking at some sort of intervention method, especially if it's a relatively intrusive intervention method. So this is what we'll talk about here is a study that that we undertook looking at these particular sites in Joshua Tree, and we if you don't know where Joshua Tree is, it is in Southern California, and that's an outline of Joshua Tree. It's I believe it is about 800,000 acres of land. It was larger. I can't remember the term, but they reclaimed some areas for mining and other things. That this particular area that's just kind of cut out was for I think like for a steel or something like that. I can't remember what kind of mine it was during World War II, but they needed some minerals for manufacturing for the World War II effort. So it's been kind of cut into slowly and surely as they've kind of chipped away at it. But that's the current size of Joshua Tree. And for this study, we selected 3 different sites, and I'll talk a little bit about the different sites and the reasons why we selected them. And I do apologize. There is, I think I have, I thought I had a typo in this one, but maybe I corrected it. So I call it a tale of 2 management plans, and and that was because we're looking at the management plan of 2 different entities. One was the National Park Service, so those sites that are within Joshua Tree National Park, and then looking at a site that was outside of Joshua Tree, known as Coyote Hole. And you can see where that is. So there are 3 sites within Joshua Tree that we selected for the study, and then 1 outside. It's nearby. It's actually on the way. This is like the road going into that you actually drive through the park. But if you drive on this road out of the park, you actually go onto a different. This land is actually managed by the San Bernardino Water District, or at least it was at the time, and that has, I believe, changed recently. So a couple of differences between the 2. So Joshua Tree National Park is managed by the National Park Service. It's governed by the NPS Organic Act. Most access is restricted to park visitors, and the management style, again, is based largely on confidentiality, whereas the Coyote Hole is managed by the San Bernardino County Flood Control District. It has relatively unrestricted access. There are signs, and this includes for OHV or exclusion. Although that wasn't necessarily effective, obviously placing signs doesn't necessarily prevent people if there isn't any enforcement from using OHVs. And there was also a remediation that was done, graffiti removal project that was undertaken, which is actually what really kind of it was that really kind of spurred this particular design of this particular project. So while I was at Joshua Tree, there was an archaeologist who had actually worked at Joshua Tree for years, and he was working at the time for I think Agua Caliente as the tribal archaeologist there. He had a long interest in this particular site in Coyote Hole, that site managed by the San Bernardino County Flood Control District. And when I first arrived in the area in 29 Palms, I wanted to see, well, what is there to see around here? What kind of rock art sites particularly are there around here? So again, I just did a Google search. This one came up. It was relatively easily accessible. So one of the first things that I did, even before I started working at the park, I moved there. This is the weekend before I went to visit this particular site. Spectacular site. It's in this box canyon, and one thing that I noticed about it is it was loaded and covered with vandalism, with graffiti. So much so that it was caked on, the spray paint was just caked on and was layered on many of these different panels. So it was admittedly a problem. And I apologize that I didn't actually get any before photographs of what it looked like at the time. But while I was at Joshua Tree, this gentleman, Daniel McCarthy, who unfortunately recently passed. So, but great guy, very knowledgeable. One of the things he wanted to see was to see this particular site conserved. So he arranged to have the Mojave Desert Land Trust, because they have a volunteer force that is not only do they do this kind of work, but they do work for any sites within the Mojave Desert, and specifically Mojave Desert Land Trust properties, which for conservation purposes, it could be for vegetation restoration or whatever. They have these these volunteers that go out and assist with these types of projects, and so he had arranged to have the vandalism, the graffiti removed using some of these volunteers, and they were using elephant snot. For those who are familiar with elephant snot, it's used quite frequently for removing paint, especially from rock surfaces. We used it in Joshua Tree as well, and so before they actually started this project, my coworker and I think I have some pictures of her, Mary Oster, one of my favorite people I've ever worked with. We went out to do a pre-documentation of Coyote Hole before they did this remediation. And these are some images of that remediation. They have those packs that were well, they actually, what they did is they brushed on the elephant snot like the night before, because it has to sit for like 24 hours. And what they're doing there, those are just pressure washers. So they have those are water packs, and they're just washing up the coyote, the elephant snot, and using other things such as wire brushes and things like that, which admittedly, as a conservation management person, was a little alarming to me as I saw these particles. This is mostly quartz, monzonite quartz. It's a pretty particulate aggregate, and it's pretty friable. And so they were basically scraping. I just kind of saw these particles of rock just basically disintegrating as they were scraping off some of this graffiti. Now, I was told that they weren't going to treat any panels that actually had rock art, which, as far as I know, wasn't the case. Of course, we didn't necessarily know because there was so much spray paint on these panels that we wouldn't necessarily have known that anyway. But I didn't actually volunteer to assist with the removal, but I did ask. It's like, do you mind if I tag along? I'm just going to take some pictures. I just want to observe what it is you guys do. I took a lot of pictures of the process as these guys were doing the work, talked to a lot of them, and other things like that. So that was one thing that kind of came up was that particular project. The other thing that came up that was also spurring this project was this particular site known as Split Rock. And so I can't remember, I think it was in July or so that this site had been brought to our attention. People camp on this site. It was a known rock art site, although it wasn't publicly interpreted as such. People aren't supposed to camp here, but they do overnight, and of course you can't, it's hard to restrict that. People build fires. You can see that there is a significant amount of soot that is has accumulated on the surface or the roof or ceiling of that rock shelter. And you can actually see the fire pit there, which is kind of weird how looking at that, it must have just been, the heat has kind of created some sort of interesting surface there. So in July, I'd gone out with another archaeologist to look at this site, because they knew I specialize in rock art and conservation management, and so we're looking at this particular site and what the particular needs might be, and kind of think about what we might need to do to move forward with this particular site. So that's me on the right-hand photo. I think that might be the photo that I submitted for the talk, and just looking at some of the you can see it's also covered in graffiti, mostly mostly chalk. So that's mostly chalk. There was some scratching, with sharp implements or sticks as well, but the majority of it was chalk. It's Joshua Tree has a big climbing community as well. Their chalk is just readily available. If you didn't bring it with you, you can probably find it somewhere. And people use that opportunity to scratch whatever they thought they needed to scratch onto the surface of that rock shelter. But there were also pictographs there as well, and so that had a chance to look at as well. So that's actually my coworker there on the right hand side. That's Mary. She was instrumental. So I want to give a shout out to her for helping me collect the data for this particular project. We divided those sites that you saw in that previous map, those 3 sites into comparable sites with different areas of Coyote Hole. And so we divide the sites into 3 different types of controls, so that we could look at monitoring methods, and so we could collect this longitudinal monitoring data for the SAA. Now, admittedly, it wasn't necessarily long-term longitudinal data like we would want to have. Obviously that takes years to accumulate, but what we did do is do frequent monitoring visits to collect data, so that we could actually start looking at least preliminary interpretations and maybe recommendations for these particular sites. So the first category were of these test sites. We called them test sites, and we had one parallel in Joshua Tree and one in Coyote Hole. So the left-hand panel is actually Coyote Hole. The right-hand is one that's in Joshua Tree that's known as the Red Diamond site. It's you can see the trinomial there. You can also see why it's called the Red Diamond site. And so this is a site that was, again, in Park Service mentality, it was a confidential site. It's a relatively, as far as we know, infrequently visited site. We know people do go there. In fact, when I was at this site, I had some visitors come up and they were looking for the site. So they weren't even just chancing, by chance came across the site. They actually knew it was there. They did some research. But admittedly, having talked to them, I don't think that they had malicious intent. They were just really interested in rock art. And so I had an opportunity to talk with them. I actually went to some other rock art sites with them as well. They were really, really nice people and just went all over Joshua Tree looking for rock art sites. And then that site there on the left-hand side is at Coyote Hole. But this is, even though Coyote Hole is a frequently visited area, this is a panel that is a little bit off. It's off a little bit higher up in the canyon face, and isn't one that most people would know about unless you had some previous information. So we use those as comparable to these infrequently visited sites for our tests. And there's a close-up of the panel of Red Diamond on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, I included a D-stretch image of the pictograph on that panel there at Coyote Hole, because frankly, it's just really hard to see without it. That petroglyph that you see there is actually believed to be more modern and possibly just somebody emulating some of the rock art that they see in the area. But this is really interesting. It's a relatively obscure and relatively uncommon figure, that what's called the maze figure, that you do see. There's a relatively well-known site called the Hemet maze site, and it's this complex geometric motif that isn't much known about, although and I'm not going to get into it much here, but looking at some of the linguistic connections, that there is some interesting research that's been done on that. But you do see this particular figure in different areas of Southern California, and it's just kind of curious that it is located here. And most of the time, it's actually a petroglyph, so it's a pictograph here, not exactly sure what that means, but rather interesting. And you can see there are other pictographic figures there as well. The second test site was what we refer to as a frequently visited site. This is a site that it wasn't treated in any way, but we know that visitors go to the site. So on the left-hand side is a panel. It's within that box canyon of Coyote Hole. People walk past it all the time as they're walking up to the dry waterfall. May not necessarily know it's there, but they at least walk past it. It's not real obvious, but if you're looking for it, it is apparent. You can see it with the naked eye. And then on the right-hand side is a site known as the Red Lady site. And this is a site, again, it's confidential. This is a site people ask, so well, how do they know it's there? It's like, again, just do a Google search. You'll find it. It's not really that hard to find. While I was at this site many times, people were there visiting. In fact, there was, and I think I have some images of a group of people that went out there for I think it was the vernal equinox when they, and I'll talk about the significance of that here shortly. But on the left-hand side, that's that panel D-stretch. You can see there's a pictograph there. It is, again, hard to see. You can see there's a number of things, including finger trails and other things going on that particular site, and perhaps some anthropomorphic figures and possibly a zoomorphic figure. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that's a non-D-stretch. It's actually very apparent. It doesn't even require D-stretch, although a D-stretch will pull out more on that panel. You can see what's called a Red Lady site. It is an anthropomorphic figure with a figure wearing a skirt or a dress. Oftentimes it's referred to as a digitate anthropomorphs as well, because they have the splayed fingers as well. So those were the two sites that we're collecting this data for, those frequently visited sites. And then the final category was the treated sites. So while Mary and I were at collecting some of our preliminary data at Coyote Hole, there was a gentleman who came out from the Mojave Desert Land Trust. This is before they were doing had all the volunteers come out, but he just wanted to do a couple tests on a couple panels. And we just kind of we crossed paths as we were out there because we were collecting data. We told him what we were doing. He told us what he was doing. He's like, oh, by the way, I accidentally did treat one of the panels with elephant snot. We weren't going to do that. I didn't realize it was a panel that had a petroglyph on it. He pointed it out to us. And so, well, obviously the damage had been done. So what we did is like, well, it's like, I talked to Mary, it's like, well, why don't we use this as one of our controls, and we can look at perhaps maybe not the long term, but maybe the short term effects, because long term would take a much longer study period of what elephant snot may do to a particular rock art panel. Because as far as I know, there haven't been, and maybe somebody here can correct me, haven't been long-term studies and monitoring on panels that have been treated with elephant snot and what the long-term conservation needs may be. The other site that we used as a treated site was Split Rock. And honestly, I can't remember if I have another slide for that or not, but I talked a little bit about Split Rock. So, and here are the images of the pictographs are on the right-hand side at Split Rock. You can see that they are relatively well preserved. They have these sunburst figures and some other relatively complex kind of rosette kind of patterns and other things like that. Still relatively well preserved. And so what had happened at I guess I don't have a slide on this, so I apologize, or maybe I do, but so after we had done that site visit at Split Rock, I had come in on Monday to the office. I think it was in August or so, and I was kind of thinking about this site, what we needed to do about it. Well, a report comes in that over the weekend, unbeknownst to me, that one of the law enforcement officers had just gotten tired of seeing the soot and the graffiti at Split Rock, and so he asked one of the maintenance guys to go out there and clean it up. Well, with no direction whatsoever, and again, not being cognizant of the fact that there was rock art at that particular site. And so they did what you'd probably expect a maintenance guy to do. It's like, okay, well, you have all this soot and chalk. So they took pressure washers out, and they basically hosed down the entire surface of the rock shoulder. Obviously, that was a concern to me. I honestly can't even describe how I felt when I heard that. My heart sank. I was like, I couldn't even believe I was hearing that they had done this without consulting our department at all. And I think it had taken me a little while, maybe perhaps a few minutes, maybe even a little longer, to compose myself that had been done. But afterwards, I thought, well, this is, I think what we need to do is, we need to do some monitoring on this particular site. Those who know anything about conservation management know that even though water seems pretty benign, water is actually one of the worst things you can add to a rock art panel. And so when they did that, that was my primary concern, because water is the catalyst for all other than anthropogenic necessarily, but all other transformation processes that will affect the conservation and preservation of a rock art panel. So this is how we conceptualize our monitoring strategy. And so I'll talk a little bit about the methods that we used for our monitoring methods. So the first thing that we did was to prepare a form that we're going to use to record the condition, doing a condition assessment on these different sites. It's a 15-page form that I prepared, and really going over these sites with a fine-tooth comb, including at the microscopic level, and recording a kind of such a state of being at the time, the state of a conditional statement at the time that we're doing the recording, with the intent that we're going to continue to collect data and add to the corpus of the data that we're going to use for preparing a conservation management plan. So this was recording all the transformational processes, including biological, chemical, and anthropogenic, that were affecting that we observed, at least macroscopically, at these particular sites. I don't have time to go into the types of transformational processes that affect rock art sites. I've done workshops on this. It's a pretty lengthy topic, so I don't necessarily have time to touch on this, but we were kind of going over these with a fine-tooth comb and recording such a kind of everything. And this forum just kind of guides you on what to look for and to record, if what you're observing with those particular transformation processes. Something else that I included, and this was actually a suggestion from one of my coworkers, that why don't you include something about the social media itself? What has actually been published, what is actually available, publicly available to the public at large. And so in this form, I create, this is just the first page of it. There is a page, and you can add to it. It's a Word document. You go through the internet, you do Google searches, and you find every indication that you have of this particular site. You could just, Google Split Rock. You'll find it yourself if you do a Google search, and then recording where the website is, who published it, what's actually there, all the content that's there, so that we have an idea of where it is in the social media world. Of course, this is going to continue to change as it gets reposted or reshared, etc. And then I think one of the most important things is preparing a rating system on the threat level to that site. And this is something that came from a variety of different scholars, as well as some contributions of my own, kind of thinking about how to rate these and the threat level of these sites. There was a paper that was prepared called ARARA, and I unfortunately can't remember the names of all the authors from that. I actually reached out to them and to see, because their paper wasn't necessarily accessible. I think it might have been in a journal, I can't remember, but they actually shared their paper with me, and I use this to help guide that kind of rating system as well. And it's a invaluable resource. And they had looked at a lot of this, and had a geologist involved in that project as well, kind of looking at how do we look at rating or ranking these sites as far as their essentially their preservation, their status of preservation. So one thing that we collected was moisture content. Again, water is the catalyst for all other things that deleterious conservation and deterioration factors that will affect rock art. So many transformation processes are affected by moisture content. So we wanted to be sure that we collected that data on a regular basis. And we did this. We visited these sites at least once a week. Usually it was on the weekends. I'd go out and because that's when we had enough sufficient daylight to hit all the sites. We use a protimeter to collect this data. Now, Ryobi actually has these tools, and I just love them to death. So they work with a phone or an iPad or a tablet or whatever. You just kind of plug them in. I just got these, by the way, for like $20. This particular one at $20 at Home Depot. And what it does, it's used for, of course, this is what archaeologists do. We don't really have any tools that are unique to archaeology. We just retool what others have used elsewhere, and think about ways that we can retool it for our purposes. And so this is used by carpenters, mostly looking at wood and masonry, and looking at the moisture content, because that's important for carpentry and other things like that. But I was like, well, I can use this for collecting moisture data from these rock art panels. And so it just connects to my iPad there. This is Mary. She's collecting, she's modeling it. Actually, she's actually collecting data. So you can see that's what the instrument looks like on the left-hand side. You hold it, the iPad in one hand, the instrument in the other. It has two prongs you just lightly touch the rock surface. Now, we don't do this on any rock art figures. So we are always careful because they are kind of pointy prongs to be sure we don't want to add to the conservation issues and preservation issues of the site. So we don't take it on the rock art, but close to it, so that we're not necessarily affecting the rock art itself. And then you can see on the right-hand side is a readout of what it actually looks like. So this is a snapshot or close-up of what it actually looks like. And the cool thing about this is that you actually you hit that take picture button there. You can take the picture where you're taking the point. So it uses the camera on the iPad. You can see where she's taking the point based on the camera. And it also on that readout gives you in this case, it's the humidity, relative humidity of the substrate. And that records that data, then we can store that data, which is essentially what we did. Record it as a photo, then we can export it and we can use it, and then we can tabulate it. And this is essentially kind of what we did, is took all that data and then we tabulated, and then we can actually start using it for analysis. Another Ryobi tool was a infrared thermometer. And so this is works the same way, connects to an iPad. It has a kind of a laser pointer. You can see where it actually is taking the readout, or the reading for the temperature. This is just recording the surface temperature, and then you can see that what it looks like there on the screen. It's the surface temperature as recorded. Again, we take a picture of it and we store that data, and then we can tabulate it for later analysis. Another thing too, and I've actually changed my methods on this because I actually have a colorimeter that I use now. But this just kind of we were using just a Munsell color chart at the time of the study because I hadn't had it at the time. But looking at color management and color, and recording the color in a most objective way possible. And of course, there is technology to assist with this. Because I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, well, I was there like 20 years ago, and it looks like the pictograph has faded over time, which may or may not necessarily be the case, but people's memory is probably the most unreliable source of collecting data that there is. So, this is why we want to collect more objective data, so we can actually use it for comparative purposes and use it for, again, preparing one of those conservation management plans. Not a Ryobi tool, but because unfortunately Ryobi doesn't have one for recording light intensity, but this is a light intensity meter that I just ordered off of Amazon. Again, relatively inexpensive, about $20 or so. You can have your own. And unfortunately, this one doesn't record the data, so you actually have to record it manually. So we would take the data and record it on a prepared form that we would be able to retabulate then later on. And climatic data, so mostly what we were concerned with was atmospheric temperature. And this is going to be, of course, as opposed to the surface temperature of the rock. Relative humidity, these can be atmospheric relative humidity, wind speed, and wind direction is what we were recording. And so I have there, that's me holding that portable weather station. Essentially, it's recording the atmospheric temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, and wind direction. And it can record other things too, but that was what we were particularly mostly concerned with as far as recording data. So that actually will record the wind direction, but what you have to do is you have to point yourself in the direction of the wind. So I figured that the easiest way to do that was to have a way to indicate what direction the wind was blowing. So I just took some flagging tape and just pick that up. It'll tell you what direction you need to point, and then you record that data. And of course, this doesn't record the data or save it, so you have to actually record it manually, which we would do so in a separate form. So looking at the results, and this is again we use that ranking system, and this was based on there was a scale of 1 to 4 that we would rank from essentially kind of basically not being a concern to being a severe concern, and so and that was assigned a score of 1 to 4, and then what we did is we would this was on that form, and then we would just tally up the score for the entire form. And this was what you're seeing here is you're seeing the overall score for each of these different test sites. And then I just kind of arbitrarily divided that then into well, what do we would consider a kind of a not at risk at all, to a moderate, to a severe, kind of looking at that range of those scores. And this was kind of done before I even did the research. So this is something I thought about. It's like, well, if it has this particular score, which I can't remember what the threshold was, it might have been 20 or so. Anything above that is going to be a severe concern. And so after we tallied it up, just kind of following that methodology, this is what we came up with. This is the overall scores for the different test sites. And you can see that the majority of those test sites are at severe risk of some sort. This is based not only just on anthropogenic transformational processes, which I think most people, when they monitor sites, that's almost exclusively what they look for. I don't think it should be the only thing, but it is the most obvious. Has anybody, altered the site in some way through graffiti or whatever? But this is based on the full gamut. So it can include graffiti and other sorts of vandalism, but it also includes those natural transformational processes as well. You can see two of the sites, the ones that essentially are less visited were the ones that were at moderate risk, but everything else was at pretty severe risk. So looking at the results for each site, this is study site 1. This is in Coyote Hole. And one thing I advocate for too is, like, you can't just collect all your data when the weather is nice. Sometimes you have to go out there and collect data, because this is what we're trying to conceptualize and understand. It's like, how is the natural environment affecting the preservation of these sites as well? And so you have to go out there when it's cold, when it's hot, when it's raining, hail, sleet, snow, whatever it is you may need to deal with, because this is how these are great observations that you can incorporate. So I went out there one day when it was raining to Coyote Hole. This is what I observed. The water's just pooling there in front of that rocker panel, and you can actually see the water actually just kind of running vertically across that panel face. And that's what you're seeing there on the left-hand side. Is that's actually the water just kind of, which we would anticipate. It's an open air site, and the water's just kind of running down vertically across the face of that panel. Looking at the Red Lady site. Again, there was this trail here that we many people, including my supervisor there, thought was exclusively related to people walking through the site. Now, and this is just from treading, and undoubtedly that is a contributing factor to why you see that furrow there. So you can see that furrow there on the left-hand side. It was most certainly it contributed to that particular furrow. But again, you have to be there at the site observing the transformation processes as they're happening, because that's all great data. So what we thought was simply just people walking through that site, because you can walk all the way through this rock shoulder from one side to the other, and that's what most people do. There was a sign that was posted to prevent people from doing that. Again, I honestly don't really think signs are that effective, especially prohibitive signs. And this is what I was advocating for. It's like, when you enter Joshua Tree or any national park, you are inundated with prohibitive signage saying, do not do this, do not do that, do not do anything, we call them don't have fun sites or signs, don't have fun signs throughout the park. Well, people don't, and studies have shown this, and my personal observation too is that people don't respond well to these. They're inundated with them. They're like, they become desensitized to these, don't do this, don't do that, and they're just going to do it anyway. There's, and so you really need to rethink about how you look at signage. So there was a sign posted to, discourage people, I guess, from walking through the site, because they were thought to be creating this furrow. Well, again, if you go there at the right time, you begin to get a better picture of, well, maybe it's not just people walking the site that's creating that furrow, or maybe they started the furrow, but the water found that furrow and is using it as a drainage channel. Or is it just a combination of the two? And we know now that that's the case. I went out there when the water was just pooling and running right through that rock shoulder. You can see that it creates this channel itself. So part of it's also erosion as well. So obviously that helps us look at, and this is the aftermath you see on the left-hand side. There is a bedrock mortar there as well. that I took a picture of it filling with water. And I can't remember if I still have that slide in here. I shortened it a little bit because this talk tends to go a little long. So I apologize if some of those slides I referred to are no longer in it. Looking at study site 3, this is this is that where that maze pictograph was at Coyote Hole, and this is taking a picture of the ground, just the deposit. So it's not just rock art panel that we're concerned with looking at conservation measures, but we're looking at their archaeology as well. And if there's subsurface archaeological deposits, that may be affected as well. And so I had taken these pictures, and it looked like somebody had been there. There was I guess there's a pit that was excavated that was thought, at least by some of my coworkers, had suggested maybe it was a looter that had actually been out to the site. I actually looked at it. I was like, I don't think this is looting at all. It looks like a dog had actually, and I think somebody walked their dog out here, because I think a dog was digging under the panel, and there were footprints there as well. And I later on talked to Daniel McCarthy about this and said, I think somebody was out there at that maze pictograph site panel, and they took their dog up there. He's like, well, no, those might be. He's like, I think that was a coyote. I was like, no, it's not a coyote. It's like there were footprints with it, shoe prints, and there as well. And so I think somebody took their dog in there. It's like, he's like, no. Those are probably my footprints, because I was out there too, and I saw where that coyote had been digging. I was like, oh, okay. Well, sometimes it helps to talk to people as well. Again, you're getting a full picture of the conservation needs of this particular site. So I think I documented Daniel McCarthy visiting the site as well, and I didn't necessarily have any concerns about his visitation to the site. So looking at Split Rock, this is the Split Rock site. So again, readjusting this is after that treatment, the pressure washing the panel. This is again thinking about, well, what is the best way to help conserve the site and to monitor and regulate visitor behavior. And so they kind of listened to me a little bit, saying, because I kept hammering every day, it's like, this prohibitive signage is not effective, it doesn't work. And so they decided, it's like, okay, well, they listened to me a little bit, and they're like, well, maybe we'll work a little bit differently on a different type of sign for this particular site to see if it'll work. And so they worked with the science department to prepare a different type of message for this particular sign. And it resulted in what I would consider probably one of the worst signs and messages I have ever seen in my life. So they tried to hybridize both prohibitive signage and also kind of conveying the significance of that site. And this is what we got: is this is a cool place, respect it. And I honestly, I can't even imagine. It's like, we're probably better off not having a sign at all if that was the message that we're going to convey. But this is kind of what we ended up with. So obviously we can look at different types of messaging and how effective that may be as well. Looking at these different study sites, so those are just kind of some observations that I made going out there to different things and different changes that took place during the course of that study. So let's look at the actual conservation concerns for each of these study sites. So looking at study site 1, again, that's that panel, that open face panel that's frequently visited at Coyote Hole. It has horizontal and vertical water flows that are documented while it is there at the site. It has a significant amount of calcium carbonate that has, mostly because of the water that's running over it, has deposited significant amounts of calcium carbonate. Fissure soils, erosion and deposition of sediment, mostly related to the traffic, the human traffic coming up and down, as well as OHV traffic up and down the canyon there. And visitor contact, which I didn't document any of that specifically, but I'm sure there is a significant amount of that since it's pretty easily accessible. For study site 2, the conservation concerns were vandalism, treatment with elephant snot, that was that treated site again. Vertical water flows, it's an open air site. It exposed to the elements. Erosion and subsurface deposits, again, this is human traffic, but also OHV, which is pretty frequent at Coyote Hole, and rock varnish, which you can see some of that there on the panel as well. Looking at study site 3 in Coyote Hole, that was that maze pictograph site. Vandalism, obviously, with that petroglyphs that somebody had carved into it or pecked into it. Dogs/coyotes, since I discerned that it probably was in fact coyotes instead of dogs after my conversation with Daniel McCarthy. Iron films, vertical water flows, and mineral accretion. Looking at the Red Lady site, these are the conservation concerns we identified there. They're the primary ones. Deflation or erosion of the shoulder floor deposits, chalk from climbers and boulderers, which is a popular activity and pastime in Joshua Tree, calcium carbonate accretion, calcium oxalate accretion, and alien abrasion. And then the red diamond site, and I apologize you can't see it because of the, but you saw the panel earlier, but with the where I have the text there, but conservation concerns there were primarily soil erosion, case hardening, and vertical water flows. And again, that's that infrequently visited site within Joshua Tree. And then looking at Split Rock, the number of concerns here, and that's me in that photo, taking really kind of looking at it under a hand lens, you know, to really kind of look at, you know, how I was looking at really kind of how deeply that chalk may have penetrated the substrate. That's what I'm doing. I am not, I will say this, I'm not adding any more chalk to that panel, even though it looks like I might be. That's actually hand lens that I'm holding there. And I'm actually kind of looking at, you know, penetration of that chalk into the substrate. But the fact, the concerns we had here were high visitation, vandalism, campfires, hygroscopic expansion of particulates, and the disturbance of subsurface deposits. And I apologize, I see that I'm going along, so I am going to go try to get through this a little quicker. So looking at just some site comparisons, I'll just go through these real quickly. And you can see that there are some patterns that started to emerge for the moisture content, with some sites exhibiting some higher levels of moisture content than others. The ones of concern were the Red Lady site and the Red Diamond site. Split Rock, the one that they pressure washed, didn't seem to retain moisture for very long. So that was actually kind of a relief in some ways after they pressure washed the surface. Looking at the light surface temperature, study site 2, that the maze pictograph site had the most intensive light intensity. That's because it is the most exposed, but part of that was an artifact simply of when I was collecting that data. So I tried to mix it up a little bit, but it was, and sometimes I just got to that site when the sun was setting, and it was on an east-facing side of the canyon, and was frankly just kind of exposed to daylight. I'm sorry, that was, and so that would increase the surface temperature significantly on that particular site. And others, some of these were in rock shoulders, so they weren't necessarily exposed to daylight. And so the surface temperature was a little bit lower. So the surface temperature was of concern there. Of course, that kind of goes with this slide here. And that's kind of where that interpretation came from, because you see that the light intensity on that panel was pretty high, pretty consistently. And that I accounted for a lot of those high surface temperatures that we saw on that particular site. Study site 3 also had, and that was that other exposed site, had some pretty high surface temperatures, but everything else, I'm sorry, light intensity. Some of the others were in rock shoulders though, and so they didn't necessarily receive as much light exposure as some of the others. And then relative humidity, you can see that there are perhaps some patterns here that you can tease out with the kind of variation, but pretty consistent. But there are, you know, after rain events, you're going to see that relative humidity increase, and part of that was, you know, going out immediately after rain events to see how long does that substrate retain the moisture and how quickly does it shed it. Looking at wind speed by site, you can see that the Red Lady site, RIV 902, has some of the most intense wind speeds. That it almost like it was like a wind tunnel, where when I was collecting the data, you can feel the wind coming through there. In fact, so much so that there have these large particulates. It would actually, the wind would pick it up and blow it in my face. Actually, it wasn't very pleasant either in many cases. So Looking at wind direction, you can see that's kind of all over the place as well, but you can see some patterns as well, kind of emerging with some of the wind direction as well. And over a long period of time, this would be useful data that we could look at these particular patterns. And so I just wanted to look at, I wanted to end there, just kind of put some shout outs to different entities that assisted with some of the work here and the studies, and people who could provide some invaluable information and data and assisted into that. I know I don't have Mary's name up here either, but I do want to give a shout out to her as well. And I will end there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. I apologize for going a little long.
Well, thank you, Jeremy, for your presentation. We do have a little time for questions. If someone has a question or a comment, please use the chat, and then we will use that for communicating questions. I'm not, okay, let me see if we have anything yet. Don't see anything offhand, although I do have a couple of comments. And you actually raised a whole lot of good questions there, Jeremy. So one of the thoughts I had in terms of conservation is you've got two kinds of issues. One is, kind of really acts of vandalism where people are doing, purposeful graffiti, and whether it's, intentionally defacing or whether they just don't know any better. And then you have the other situation where you've got people like, rock climbers, site staff who are cleaners, even tour leaders and photographers that may not just know what kinds of things could be harming something. They really don't mean to harm anything. And all of those sort of may require different approaches in terms of, education, signage, etc. And maybe it would be good to have some kind of ways of doing outreach to these various communities. Education. I was just looking at a Facebook post actually of Tassili in Niger, the rock art site in Algeria that I'm thinking of visiting. And there was a post of a tour guide talking about how fragile these sites were, these beautiful, carved sites, and he's leaning on it with his hand and touching it at the same time as he's talking about fragility. So it's kind of like, wow, we really do need to get some education out there, because I'm sure he doesn't mean to be harming these sites, but there he is harming the site. And that probably happens a lot more than we like. So there's kind of this inadvertent harm that I think we could address if we somehow had some kind of a campaign to let tour groups and custodians and climbers and such be aware of the issues. Have you given any thoughts to that? How do you think we could actually affect those kinds of users of sites?
Yeah, I have, and you are correct. I observe this as well, is that there really are two when we're looking at anthropogenic changes, and there really are kind of two different types of visitors. Essentially, there are the inadvertent ones that they may just be touching it because they're observing it and enjoying it, or maybe that, like you said, they're climbers. They just don't even know it's there. And there's a lot of that is most certainly the case, or people just don't really understand rock art conservation needs. And then there are the ones who purposely deface stuff, and there are also, when you're looking at people who are purposely deface rock art images, rock faces, there are two types of people there as well. So there are the opportunistic ones who are going to use something in the immediate environment. It might be a piece of charcoal, might be chalk, might be something they carry on their person, maybe a Sharpie, a lipstick, whatever. We see that a lot, where they're using it to leave whatever impression they want to leave, I guess. And then there are ones who use spray paint. So the difference there is people are using something in the immediate environment, and I think they're perhaps less harmful. But the people who carry spray paint into a national park, there's only one purpose you have in mind. for that. They're going with the intention of defacing something. And so how do you reach out to those different communities? I think most certainly the ones who are opportunistic are a little easier to reach out to. I think in a lot of that, again, comes from conservation management, the conservation management plan, and looking at the needs. But maybe some signage. And I'm a big advocate for signage. Whether it's a high profile site or low profile site, you can have different types of signage. But you appeal to the visitor. You don't necessarily tell them it's cool, but you show them how it's cool by talking a little bit about that site, and they will make that connection themselves. And then and when people really recognize the significance of the site, they're less likely to deface it. And so that's one way. Another way to, of course, graffiti and stuff like that, because graffiti tends to attract more graffiti. It operates under the Arlo Guthrie trash magnet effect type thing. And so it's which I just love that when we talk about it with archaeology. But it's that's where trash tends to attract more trash. It's the case with graffiti as well. If there's some there, people are going to think it's all right. So I think as part of that's just appealing through signage. With the climbing community at Joshua, they actually have a really good relationship with it, because the climbers, all they want to do is climb. They don't necessarily care about where it is. I mean, they want to climb certain faces, but they're also cognizant about preserving the park too. They love the park. They love it. And they don't want to destroy it either. And so what they've done is they've worked with the climbing community, and they've changed some of these climbing routes, even removing some bolts that might be problematic in some of the panels, or if it's not in a panel, it might cause you to cross over to one. And so reaching out again to those different communities and actually talking to people. So when I was at Joshua Tree, I actually would talk to people and go to sites with them. That they invited me along because of my I don't know, I guess I just appeal to people, and sometimes I just impose myself, like, hey, you're going to a rock art site, I'd love to go too. And they just don't know how to say no to me, I guess. So but I just talked to them about about that, how they found out about the site, not necessarily in an interrogation way, but just kind of giving information. And so you get some qualitative data that way as well. And then all that is good when you're looking at how to best manage these sites. Unfortunately, there isn't a one size fits all for each site, but you can start to think about, maybe you can start working with different methods, and signage might be a way to start. If you have a high visited site, I think signage is probably the first thing you should consider, or at least one thing to consider, and appeal to that visitor.
Yep. Yeah, I think getting in touch with your local tour leaders and stuff. A lot of times they don't know what things can be harmful. They might wet down a site because it makes things stand out, but they don't realize that they're harming it in the long run. So, I think education, just to avoid inadvertent kind of damage, would be good. Here's a couple of other questions. Has there been any longitudinal data on the various environmental conditions that you were testing for, things like moisture, temperature, luminescence, to identify which are the most important with respect to site deterioration?
Not to my knowledge. I think like on this particular sites we were working on, I think the only longitude data we were really collected was what we were collecting. And having read through, and I haven't read like all the literature out there, but when I started this kind of path down conservation management, really kind of try to get my hands on any sort of papers and articles that have been produced and prepared. And I really haven't seen longitude data that anybody has published. I don't know. It's possible that some are collecting it to some extent, but I'm not aware of it. But one thing, and if anybody who is in my workshop may be aware that we have, especially like places like California, Utah has I think Utah's program, Nevada has a program of these site steward monitoring programs that are great. And in California, it's called the CASET program. I was kind of tertiarily involved in that, and we have a ready source of volunteers who are going to go to these sites. You give them a purpose that they will go to these sites. They sign up willingly to go visit these sites at least once a month. That's like, well, everything that I did here, everything that I showed, you can. It's not cost prohibitive. You can go to Home Depot And maybe less than $50, you have a toolkit where you're collecting real data. And if you actually have this program, you're working with these people, you can have them collecting the data for you. They're going there every month, and then you can start compiling this data. And I would advise working with these volunteers. They want to collect data. Usually they just go to these sites and they're looking for vandalism. But you give them the tools, the know-how, they will do it. And then you get real data that you can use.
Yeah, okay. So here's another question related specifically, I guess, to the Joshua Tree site. Has damage been done to trails, to the trees themselves, and other plants by visitors? Is there things like ripping up vegetation, making trails completely off the designated trail, ripping up vegetation in the process, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a perennial problem with Joshua Tree. It is a kind of a fragile desert environment that doesn't regenerate itself very quickly, and so people will they'll take down trees. They'll use it for firewood. In fact, I was down at the Oasis of Mara it was for something work related, and I saw this guy hauling out firewood from the Oasis of Mara, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" I'm not law enforcement, but I said, "You can't take that." He's like, "Well, where am I going to get firewood?" I was like, "The gas stations all around here all have firewood. It's like you can't take it from the park." So I was like, "You need to put it back, or I'll need to call law enforcement," and he did. But obviously, there's a lot of that goes unmonitored, and sometimes they will take down Joshua trees in order to do it as well. Definitely the unregulated trails is also a problem. So I think they call them social trails or something like that. I can't remember the term we use, but yeah, they try to direct people onto these managed trails, but people would just kind of cut cross country, and it's a delicate ecosystem as well. So if you walk across these, I can't remember the ecological term for it. These kind of surfaces or crusts that form. It takes a long time for these to form in an environment that gets relatively little rainfall. So they were trying to change some of this, doing things like mulching and stuff like that to cover up some of these trails. So there is definitely a lot of that is going on. It has had some success, but you can't prevent everybody. If there's a rock face that somebody wants to climb, they know where it is. They will cut, make a beeline for it. And unfortunately, that's hard to regulate.
Yeah. Well, we're getting late on time, so I think I'm going to thank you for your presentation. I'm sure everybody here will be thinking about things that they might be able to do to help in the conservation process. So thanks to all the attendees for your interest. Of course, if you would like to learn more about ARARA or get involved, please check out our website and Facebook pages. And we invite everyone to renew or join our membership to support the study and conservation of rock art. So until next time, everybody, good night and stay safe.